I know the lunch conversations are the best part. One of the things we joked about was calling this. We tried to come up with a new name instead of Turn the Page. We were trying to figure out riffing off of something on ScoutIQ. We were going to do something called ScoutIQ Reunion, just because it feels like a reunion. Everybody's here talking, having a good time. Last night around the dinner table was awesome. The only downside is many of you understand that family reunions can be awkward. And so we decided to move away from that name. But looking here, everybody's on the sectional, everybody's hanging out. I think we're just going to call it the reunion. So nice. We're going to run with that. All right. Michael has the unfortunate reality of being the after lunch speaker, which means all of our sugar levels are about to crash.
Yeah, mine too.
So I'm gonna suffer through it with him. I'm gonna do a little bit of an interview style. Michael and we met at Greg's event.
Yeah, like
way back.
15 probably. Ish.
We connected. I wouldn't say we really hit it off. I knew he was doing some impressive things in the book world, but we've actually hit it off pretty well as friends over the last year or so. We went to Avery's event in June?
No, that was
April, and unfortunately, I was sitting in the front row with David. I was a good kid, like all of you here, and Michael and I ended up talking in the back. Avery had to throw us out of the room because we were just in the back chit-chatting for several hours. So Michael and I did actually a bit of a health challenge. Mm-hmm. We were both getting a little bit overweight and said, let's
still
fix this.
But yeah.
So we did a cool challenge. I was actually telling Ben Roop about it over lunch. We did a challenge because for me, I'm not that driven. Like I can be, but I needed some accountability. So here's what we did. If this works for you, great. I said, we're gonna book some cool trip. Let's do a fishing trip, which he does a lot, so we turned that down. I was like, maybe we can do a golf trip, but I do that a lot, so that's not a good idea. So we found a whitewater rafting trip. We flew into Vegas, and they drop us in with a helicopter, and we raft for 3 days. So we booked that trip. We just paid for it and said, we're gonna do the trip.
3 months, I think, ahead of time.
It was like 3 months ahead of time. Yeah. And then we set goals. He had to lose however much weight, I had to lose however much weight. And the challenge was both of us had to hit the number. So we weren't competing against each other, we were competing with each other. So if he hit his number and I didn't, neither of us could go on the trip, we would have wasted the money. We actually would have had to donate the trip to somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. So that's an incredibly powerful accountability tool. So anybody that's struggling in their business, find somebody here, set some kind of a cool goal. It doesn't have to be a whitewater rafting trip, but set up something, commit to it in advance, prepay it, and then I was not going to let him down, right? We were both procrastinators. We got near the end and we eventually got there, but that's Michael. Yeah. So Michael, you want to tell a little bit about yourself? Maybe some embarrassing things about me, and then we're going to get into the scale-up section of the talk.
What do you want to know about myself?
Just something, what do you like doing?
The noises Caleb makes when he's right about to go over the rapids.
It's a lot of squealing.
It's intense. And at night when you sleep, which was actually great. We slept on cots just out under the stars. We had bats flying like a foot above our heads constantly.
Saw the Milky Way.
Yeah, it was a good trip. Just a side note, another good motivational thing. I told you about it. There's a company, if you want to set goals and you put up money, they'll hold it in escrow, and you give them the things that you support. And once you achieve your goals, they will give that money to the organization that you support. If you don't hit your goals, then they give that money to the opposite that you support. So you use your imagination. It gets pretty rough sometimes.
What's the name of that?
I can't remember the name. I'll find it for you.
I've heard of it.
It's because it's like they'll donate to like the KKK. I mean, it's intense. Like they'll donate to the opposite of what you want to donate to.
Oh boy.
It's not. Yeah, it's not good, but you do not miss your goals. I'm from Dallas area, Texas. I live right by Denton, which is just north of Dallas. Our offices and warehouses are in Carrollton, which is right in Dallas, basically right outside of it. I've been married for 14 years. I got 3 kids, 6, 4, and 2 that are home right now, and I'm enjoying some sleep. But I don't like being away from them, but they keep me busy. I started Franklin Media, which is our company, in 2013. Really was the year we incorporated, and I started in Franklin, Tennessee. I'm from Dallas, but we lived in Nashville for years, or just outside of there, and so Franklin Media started in 2013. Do you want me to talk about how we started? So like a lot of people in this room, just starting scanning books. I was a musician for years, and I was in between publishing deals, and I didn't know whether I wanted to get a job. I already sold collectible books just as my own, like I collected first printings and that kind of thing, and I enjoyed that. And once I knew that I needed to get a job, I thought, what about textbooks? And so I started going to McKay's, which Avery knows is back a long time ago, and other thrift shops, and just scanning textbooks with just my phone. I couldn't even scan them. At that point, I had an iPhone. I just entered ISBNs. There's hundreds of ISBNs. It was very tedious. But I started with $300. I had like $500 in the bank, bought $300 of books, sold it for $600, bought $600 of books, sold it for $1,000, just kept growing that. And so 2013 was the first year that I really dove in and decided I'm just going to do this full time, and I sold $500,000 in books. It was great, just scanning, sending into FBA.
Any employees?
No employees, no. Next year, 2014, same thing, no employees. I sold $1 million in books, just picking them up, scanning, mostly was going to half-price bookstores, and going on road trips. I'd take trucks or cars, I'd rent box trucks, and I'd go through 7 states, pick up books, come back, ship them either on the way or ship them at home, and just kept growing from there. And so in 2015 was the first year that I hired a couple people. 2016 is when I hired our general manager, and that's when things really kind of started taking off. And we got our first official warehouse. We had garage apartment I worked in. We had a 2,000 square foot shop. Then we went to a 16,000 square foot warehouse. Then we got another 16,000 square foot warehouse. And we just kept, growing from that point. And yeah, I mean, it's been a good journey for me, kind of doing every part of every job, essentially.
Yeah. So we'll get to the scale part of that equation in just a second. When you were getting started, what was like that? Do you remember the first book you sold? Do you remember that first process, like the first little bit, the first few sales?
Sure.
So talk through that just a little bit, and then like, what was your aha moment where you realized, oh my gosh, this actually might work?
I think, textbooks were a big focus for me. I mean, that's always been my focus, and that's what was my aha moment. Was I saw a lot of people scanning a lot of things, and I had been selling, like I said, collectibles, which move very slowly. The goal was, it was more of a hobby than anything. But once I got into textbooks, I realized they move quickly, they move seasonally, they get big price jumps. And those first few books, obviously I didn't realize it in the first few books, but the aha moment for me was realizing how many people were only wanting to buy books for 50 cents, $1, $2, $3, that kind of thing, and sell them for 10, 12, 8. But for me, I started looking quickly at books that were $5, $10, $15, $20 books that I could sell for, $20, $30, $40, $50. And so to me, I could see a lot of people working really hard to sell a lot of material, a lot of touches, a lot of labor, a lot of even more scanning. And for me, I quickly saw it's just about moving money. That was all it was about, was turning the money, and I could turn it a lot faster with higher end material. So I think the first few books kind of did that. And then I got 200 textbooks in my closet, took everything out. I mean, we were in a 1-bedroom condo. My wife and I took all the clothes out of the closet, put bookshelves in, had a desk in our bedroom, and had 200. I remember I had 200 textbooks in there, and I was like, I've made it. I won't ever have to work again. This is, and I was shipping about 16 or 17 books a day. But they were 16 or 17, $30 to $50 books a day. It was great at that point, like just when I first started out. And I'd go to the post office and drop off my bin, and yeah, those times were good because it was simpler. It was fun to see, you catch that bug and you start. It's just finding money, right? Like that's all it is. So it's exciting.
So today you run a couple million, about $3 million business, give or take?
Yeah, we've done about 25 million total probably in sales. It's probably about 1 million textbooks, and we do somewhere between $3 and $4 million a year usually. COVID set us back a little, and then we're basically back close to where we started.
So at this point, looking back over the beginning stages, what are some mistakes you made? Because a lot of people here are beginners. So what are a few mistakes you made along the way, or is there anything that almost put you out of business? Or were you just like slowly ramping this thing up in those first 2 years?
I don't do a lot of things slowly, and so that would be probably my biggest benefit, is that I don't have, like, my risk threshold is pretty high, and I think you need that if you want to scale quickly. It's all a matter of how quickly you want to scale. And so I took probably a lot of risks quickly. Those first couple years where it's just scanning, that's pretty simple. I mean, it's per book. I know exactly what I'm doing on some level. There wasn't a lot of mistakes those first couple of years because you know what you're getting into. Once I started handling, what got me into more bulk, and so our model is a little different. We're still 95% textbooks, but we handle bulk textbooks, right? So you mentioned GovDeals. GovDeals is actually the first place. In 2015, I bought a couple school district loads from school districts that were getting rid of textbooks. That sparked the idea that school districts have textbooks. Fast forward, cold calling school districts over the country, mainly through Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma. And a couple of years later, we picked up 400 trucks of K through 12 textbooks that year. And it really grew. That was great. But once I got into the bulk, the problem was I went in very quickly, high risk threshold, had a couple sources. The main one was a liquidation source. I had Amazon warehouses that I was getting the liquidated textbook returns from, which were really good, but they were very expensive. And so I would say that was the biggest mistakes that legitimately could have put us under, because we were spending, I think the last year we did it, I mean, I did it, it was in the third year or the fourth year, we spent $700,000 on that source, and at the end of the year realized that we had sold $1 million from that source, which is not enough. It sounds like it's enough, but it's not even close to enough. So we were losing about $150,000, $200,000 a year on that source. And it's interesting, I thought about this earlier. One part of scaling I think that's important with that is it's good to fail, because it's good to miss the mark sometimes, but you have to recognize you fail, and it's about how quickly you can adjust. Because for us, as easy as it sounds, once you've seen the numbers, it's really difficult to cut unprofitable revenue, because it's easy to get revenue in your head as the goal, but revenue is not the goal. And so that was probably the most dangerous thing to us, was a couple unprofitable big, bulk type textbook sources that were just expensive.
Yeah. So you brought up a good point of looking at your business.
Yeah.
One thing, I'll share our process. I'm really curious what your process is. So part of the thing as you scale, we love to have multiple income sources, right? We talk about multiple revenue streams. It's really sexy. It also means you can just be distracted and work nonstop. And if you don't come up for air and step back and look at your business, it just feels like you're successful. It feels like you're moving forward, but in reality, sometimes you're making really poor decisions.
Yeah.
So I'll share just 30 seconds, well, I don't talk quickly, but 2 minutes, what we do in our business, and I'm really curious how you kind of make decisions as well. So one thing I do, I try to do it quarterly. I'm not as disciplined as I could be. Matthew and I used to do it when we shared an office together. We'll literally go through, we'll put all of the revenue sources. So for us, with all the software streams, we'll put any way we make money on the board. We'll just list them out. So for us, it's ScoutIQ, PalletIQ, we have a marketplace program, eFlip. We list all these things out. Then we list the revenue. We try not to color anything in. We just say, here's the revenue, here's the profit, and then just generically how much effort is involved in this business. And then we literally just put that down for every single business unit: revenue, profit or loss, amount of effort involved in it, and then we step back. And when you do that, the process of actually writing it down actually does something weird. I don't know the chemistry, but it triggers something in your brain. And then stepping back and looking at it, because we kind of know what our numbers are, but when you put it on one whiteboard, one piece of paper, and then step back, you kind of go, what are we doing over there? A lot of times we'll have something that we're excited about, we think it's got potential, and we look at it and go, this is a ton of effort, we're not making much revenue, and we're probably losing money. And it's really hard when you've invested in something to say, hey, this is super important, I feel good about it. It's hard when it's making money to then go, I probably shouldn't be doing this. And a really good question to ask is, what if I brought a consultant in and they looked at this? So remove your own bias, remove that from the equation, and say, if someone else was to look at my business, the 80-20 rule works. The Pareto principle is just a universal law. You're going to have pieces of your business that are a lot of effort and very little reward. And if a consultant was to come in and look at that business, what would they tell you to do about it? And it's really hard to give something up. But like Avery's talking about, potentially shutting down or changing restrictedinventory.com. For us, we're going to be doing something a little bit differently with our marketplace program. But when you actually look at the numbers, and once a year, if you're not doing it once a year, you're doing yourself a disservice. And in reality, most of us have only been in business a couple years, if that. Do it once a quarter. Literally pull your numbers, go through that process, step back, look at it, and that will really be enlightening in terms of what you should be doing. And if you only have one revenue stream, if it's just Amazon, break that down then into I source from thrift stores, libraries, consignment, Facebook, break down your sources, and then do the same thing. How much money am I bringing in, top line? What's the profit? How much effort is involved? And then do I believe in this as a future source? When you do that, that'll be really insightful. So I'm curious, do you do something similar? How does that work in your business?
So we do, I wish we did it quarterly. It's more, we basically do it, because we're so textbook oriented, we do it every turn. So we do it September and February, basically, was when we look at our, essentially our enterprises, which are basically just our sources, right? We've got, enterprise to us would be, like I have a higher ed department, and they just work in the higher ed space, college bookstores, universities, campuses, that kind of thing. And so that is a piece. We tend to look at it, I look at it yearly as a whole business, but twice a year we really look at our sources, like you said, because to us, that's the most important piece. And for a lot of people, they often have, it's sort of the 80-20 rule. And 80% of your revenue or however you look at it, tends to come from 20% of your sources or your suppliers. And so those are your most important ones, but they can also obviously cause you big problems. So yeah, we tend to look at each source at the end of each turn and figure out, okay, so that because we've had blind spots in the past that just feel good because they're bumping our top line, and we get to the end and realize, oh, this is bumping our top line, but we're not making enough money on it. So we don't go super deep. We basically look at essentially our gross profit. We consider our overheads after that as a whole, but for our sources, we just look at our gross profit. If it's marketplace, like after marketplace fees, wholesale is just straight wholesale. And then, we have commissions, we have other things we have to incorporate, and we do consider the processing time, obviously, of everything, meaning even if it's profitable, how much time does it take to process, how much overhead would that account for? But one thing we actually look a lot at is how can we scale this piece? Meaning, it may be really profitable, but depending on the size of it, can we 5x this? Can we 10x this? And what does it take for us to do that? We talked to someone earlier about that. Does it take 2 people? Does it take 3 people? Can we do it with our current work labor force, but we just have to add time or whatever it may be? And then we still may not keep it if it's just to the point where it's not worth the effort, even though it is profitable sometimes. That's just part of that. I feel like the scale, depending on where you are.
Yeah. So let's go back in time. You said your second year you did $1 million, just you. On that $1 million, Amazon probably paid out $600K-ish. Do you know what your net on that was?
It was about 225.
So we made about 225, so about 22% margin, which is awesome. That's after buy costs, probably travel, everything. So you're making $200,000. That's awesome, right? So why did you, and when Rupe and Lorenzo and I over lunch were kind of talking about, when do you decide to double down?
Right.
And when do you say, you know what, $200,000 is enough. I'm good. So did you kind of have a conversation with yourself at that point to say, hey,
Sure.
should I put my chips in the middle of the table and keep ramping up?
Right.
Or is this good and I can then spend more time with my family? Like what was that decision like?
I was talking with someone earlier about this idea that you're trading your time for money. You know that if you're sick, you break your leg, you get COVID, whatever it may be. At that point, there was no COVID, but whatever it may be. That revenue stops. So that $225,000, whatever it is sort of it's a mirage. It exists, but it only exists to the extent that I'm healthy and I'm able. And I think that to me it was freedom, but it was also security. Like I would rather make less money but have the security of knowing that it's stable than making more and knowing it can go away at any moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the thing I thought about when I was building my business, and I was just cherry picking, same thing. I didn't have the success you did. I think I did just over $100,000 was part-time the first year, about $350 the next year, about $700, then we cracked $1 million. So it took me 4 years to get there.
Right.
But what I realized was I didn't own a business.
Yeah.
I owned a job.
Yeah.
And if I stopped working, I had inventory that was still selling, and so it felt like success.
Exactly.
And so I could be on the golf course and look at my sales, and hey, I'm making money, but that's a result of work I put in before.
Right.
And so I realized, and it sounds like you did the same thing, I own a job. And it's better than, in my mind, I wanted freedom. It's better than working a job. but it wasn't a business. If I stopped putting my inputs in, the outputs would stop being generated as well.
Sure.
And that was like, wait a second, this isn't really sustainable. So
Yeah.
it sounds like that's where you were at.
Well, and another thing too is to know that when you take that step, it's usually a stair step type mentality. You're going to plateau or possibly reduce your income by scaling. And I did, and I even know now, even where we are now, I can look at it and go, I could peel off 2 sources we have and make twice as much money as I make at the end of every year. Easily, like just if I just want to do that next year, we could do that. But the goal is not how much money can I make today immediately. The goal is growth and thinking. And not everybody will think through necessarily have that plan, but thinking 1, 3, 5 years out, where can we be? And in order to get where we want to go in 5 years, there's a dip in essence of personal, I guess, gain, so that the business can gain by because it's not your overhead. Sometimes gains faster, obviously, than your profit with your warehousing equipment, time, incentivizing employees, whatever it may be. But I think over time I've seen that stair step and those dips happen, but it always comes back if you're on the right track, if you've done the numbers, if you are doing something that will end up at scale. That's why I say we take everything and we look. We basically don't do anything that we don't think we can do at scaling it, 2, 3, 4, 5 times bigger than it is. Because if we can't, then it's just not worth. We're going to lose money as we scale it. Is the problem. So.
Yeah. No, I love the long range approach. Yeah. And at first, you're just the startup phase is you don't really care about the long term. You're just trying to say, can I buy something and flip it? Mm-hmm. And then you start to say, hey, I'm going to have a long range approach. Yeah. So your aim, having a long range thinking, actually was incredibly insightful. So from that moment where you said, I got $1 million in sales, I have this job, I need to start actually making this a real business. Yeah. What were the next couple steps you did? Who did you hire? How did you make those decisions? And how did you kind of go through that process to actually scale up?
So I was in a 2,000 square foot shop, on my parents' land, so it was free, which is a huge benefit. And I had one guy that would come in and sort books periodically, and that was pretty much it. But what did it for me was we had that 2,000 square foot. I mean, there's an element of growing only when you have to. I mean, you really want to take on all those extra either when it's kind of like you think about Shark Tank when you have purchase orders, right? Like you've got to have some reason to grow, not just hope. Hope is not a strategy, right? Like that, we've all heard that a million times. So I had 2,000 square feet. But it was full, floor to ceiling, down the driveway. I'm backing semis down residential roads, so it's cracking driveways. It got to the point where I have to expand this, or I have to limit it. And so one of my best friends, which some of you guys know, James, he's our general manager now. I've been friends with him for 25 years. He was operations guy. He worked at a steel mill for 9 years. Was an HVAC guy for 9 years. He's worked in a lot of. He was a perfect person. I'm a big believer. It's kind of the good to great mentality. Like he was a perfect person, and for that seat on the bus of driving the bus, essentially, as the general manager, I needed someone to do that because I am relationship. I am more sales guy. I'm bringing in the books, but I needed someone who could really run a warehouse, confront the problems that you're going to come up with, equipment. I mean, everything that you can think of. And even the process, even building your flow and everything, that is his world. So the best decision I ever made was hiring James. I mean, I would tell him that, I've told everyone that. Like I went from 1 million and the next year did 2.7. Like it immediately jumped. So we went from that 2,000 square foot shop, and I said, within a few months, I asked James, I basically hired James in February 1st, 2016, got a new warehouse in March, 16,000 square feet, hired 2 more people. It was just James and 3 other people working, and then started bringing in books, started processing more material. Then we got temps. That's a great way to scale. If you just need labor to sort and you have a system that's real easily just scannable, you want your system, on some level, you want your system to be handled by anyone off the street, can just walk in, scan books, and do something with them. And so we were able to scale up with temps for a while to just put in front of a computer scanning books, and that really helped. That year, 2016, was sort of the big moment for us of getting a warehouse, me hiring someone to run the warehouse, even though it was minimal. There was still only 3 or 4 people in there. But it was beneficial because it freed up my time. And that's the thing. I realized at some point, I'm spending, $250 an hour time doing a $15 an hour job. And that's just not, it wasn't beneficial. As James would always tell me, I'm going to have to fire you, even though you're the president, because you're not doing your job. You need to be sourcing books. And so, so that was that was the breakover point for us of realizing Avery said that. I mean, depending on your skill set, you are most likely most valuable with your relationships and bringing in books. The processing right now you have to do, but long term that's probably not what you should be doing unless you find someone better than you at sourcing. I mean, that's generally what it is.
So one of the things that stood out to me, David, where is David? Hiding in the back. David has one of the most organized warehouses I've seen. It's very clean, everything has a home. He's very proud of what he's built, of the systems that are there. And when you go in there, it's very evident that it's a well-oiled machine. Michael gives David a run for his money, and I think actually sets the bar a little bit higher. So I went down, I had the luxury of going in a couple months ago.
Yeah, a couple months.
Yeah, stopped in Dallas, got to see the warehouse. It was impeccable. The other thing that stood out to me is he had invested in custom furniture. It was like metal and wood. It's very, very beautiful. But you walk into the office, and it's a warehouse. He has some office space up front, pretty good warehouse space behind. Everything had a home. Everything was tidy. The floors were clean. I would have eaten off the concrete floors, actually. They were that good. But just walking in, there was a sense of, whoa, this guy does things well. He does things right. And I know that's been something that has always been the case for you.
Yeah.
So how did that become something that became part of your identity? Mm-hmm. And was that hard to kind of say, hey, I'm going to set the bar high, and then what has that done for you?
Because our model is a little different, and we are, again, because we're so textbook focused, we're very B2B oriented, right? We don't, and most people are sourcing from businesses, but because we don't really go to the consumer other than to sell, but we're dealing with textbook distributors, companies, bookstore chains, and once we start scaling and thinking bigger, to me, I mean, it's the dress for the job you want, not the job you have, right? Like we've all heard that. On some level, we wish it wasn't true, but there is some truth to it, right? We want, no one in this room right now, as I can see, has a suit and tie, and that's not something that necessarily make Bill. Bill's got some Hawaiian shorts, but there is a beauty to doing what we do to having some flexibility there, but there also is. A prime example is I got an alert this morning. I have new chairs coming into my office to be put in there because I have a meeting in 2 weeks with the president of a company that's doing $250 million a year. So it's not that. Does that matter? Yes, it does. That's what I would say. It matters that they walk into our offices, and we have offices, and we have a conference room, and we've got branding, and it looks nice, and they're comfortable, and it's sort of an assumed. Success is the wrong word, but it legitimizes you. It's the same thing of we go to trade shows and conferences, and we join organizations, and we're part of groups merely because it gives you legitimacy. And so there's a level at which you can scale, and you can get supply from local thrift store, whoever it may be. It could be national chains. There is a level, though, at which you separate yourself by creating an image of success, and that doesn't mean you have to dress up. And it's just that, I've been to a lot of us have been to book warehouses. Most of them are not places I would bring those people. I would meet them off site, and so I feel like for me, I wanted to create that point. You came in and you go, wow, this is impressive. We've had a lot of even the people, textbook companies that come in, and I feel like in my mind, the ROI on that has been huge. Like it's legitimately the furniture, the conference rooms, I mean, all the stuff we've done, it's paid for itself over and over and over because all you're looking for is one yes from someone that can drop, whatever. We want to give you 200,000 textbooks. Well, that may be the difference between. So why not? I mean, that's really what I've come down to is why not invest? Don't invest in stupid things. But I would argue that a lot of it, depending on your business, is is not stupid at a point. It's branding. It's the same reason we take you and a bunch of guys fishing and do other things. Like we take clients out. We go to football games. And you can't do that at every. Not everyone is going to do that, and not everyone honestly, not everyone's worth doing that for. But at some point, you do the math and you go, wait a minute. You do the 80-20, or you go and you assess and you go, wait a minute. This source is bringing in whatever. This source is bringing in $50,000 a year. Well, I should send them a $500 gift card. I should send them something, because that's a significant amount of money. You need to take care of them. I mean, and you want them to remember you. And my dad ran a business that he sold recently, and he always said, all things being equal, people buy from their friends. So it's my job to make sure, all things are not equal, basically.
Yeah. I believe setting matters. You look around this room, it's cozy, it's done well, it's got really modern elements. If you're in a nice room, like most of you are still sitting up, you're alert, thank you for not falling asleep after lunch. If you're in a good environment, that just helps you. And I remember leaving your warehouse and your office going, man, I kind of felt a little bit inferior going, I need to get my stuff together. Because having stuff that's organized, it just helps your brain stay organized, and it helps not only yourself, but it helps, like you said, give that element of legitimacy. So kudos to that.
Sure.
I think when you walk into a nice restaurant and you see that, wow, someone cared about this, and it just goes back to the age-old saying, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing well.
Yeah.
And I think that can be true. Even if you're in the startup phase of your business, I think it's important to kind of set things up well, set that environment up well, and if you're going to do it well.
Oh, yeah.
And that stands up for you, that stands out to those you want to do business with as well.
Well, and it doesn't have, I know when I'm talking, it sounds like it's more about appearance, but it also, especially the beginning level, it has to do a lot with, if you have a company, then you don't need to pay a fortune, but come up with a logo. Then when you have a logo, have an email signature, have a logo on your, branding is so much of legitimizing who you are with anyone, because what thrift stores, college bookstores, any of these people, they might have 1 million people reaching out to them, and only 2 of them have logos and email signatures, which sounds really simple, but that goes a long way. It's just make it as professional as you can and as easy for them to say yes to as possible, basically.
All right, I have 2 more questions for you, then we'll open it up to the floor, and if I can remember these 2 questions. First is, now that you have a business that's running, you don't need to be there every day. We took 3 days away from technology and nothing burned down in our business, fortunately. Matthew tried to say it did. Where do you spend your time now? How do you kind of best use the asset of your time in the business? What does that look like today?
I'm in the process of stepping away is difficult. It's something you have to sort of force yourself to do a little bit. So I have purposely stepped away on a lot of things. I've allowed people to take over things that I held on to pretty tightly to. Number one, because I realize they can do them just as well or better than I can. But number two, it helps me. And you kind of alluded to this earlier, but the idea of looking at your finances, for instance, every quarter or every half, you can only do that if you have the time to do it. If you're always in the trenches and you have to be sorting or doing every other piece, a lot of times you just don't pick up your head to stop and consider. And so, for me, it's all 30,000 feet now. I don't really deal with the books, which I miss. I like doing that, but I haven't done that in years. It's all relational. It's all helping facilitate my people, especially in the field of what they're doing, their relationships. How can I help them make those stronger, better? Because the goal for me, number one, with employees too, was to create businesses for everybody within the business. It's the best way to grow, is to incentivize people, give them sort of their own enterprise and a way for them to succeed. It's the best way not to lose people. It's the best way to make them be successful. And so I feel like that's been a focus of mine, because I have people now sourcing, is how can I make them more successful at sourcing? Because I can continue to do it myself, but that doesn't help me step back. It doesn't help me get away. So I need to be stepping back slowly, but just piecing in when I can to basically make all of my people better at what they're doing, essentially.
Yeah, love that. What do you see yourself doing over the next 2 to 3 years? So you built this empire, you kind of ramped up. One of the reasons we kind of hit it off, I'm not super into the food movement. I think Michael's going to win me over in terms of grass-fed and local food. He introduced me to a book. I know I flip books. I actually read them from time to time. But The Omnivore's Dilemma, it's Michael Pollan. It's probably an older book. It's classic.
Yeah, it's good.
But I just finished it, and it kind of opened up this whole new world to me in terms of food. And I know you want to open a farm and potentially move back to Tennessee, Kentucky, you do something there. What does that look like for your business? Because this kind of gets into the next talk we're going to get into, which is stepping back. So what does that look like for you? How do you kind of envision the business moving forward as maybe your priorities shift a little bit?
So, there's two ways that can go. And I was originally considering really selling the business to step away completely. But COVID was just the nature of things. That was a difficult time for us, for the business. We took a step back because of our sourcing model. So all of that to say, I'm still headed down that road. I still want to sell the company eventually, and I have meetings about that kind of thing. But the truth is,
we can do an auction right here.
Yeah, let's do it. I want to. So I do. Yeah, we just sold our house. We have a rental. We got 9 months left on it. And in the next 9 months, we're going to buy, 150 acres somewhere and start a farm. We're going to do a number of things on that. I've been working for the last 2 years. I have a friend that has a farm north of Dallas, and I've been working with him. He does sheep and vegetables and some other things, farmers markets and all that stuff. And so I go out there about a day a week and work with him just to get my hands dirty. And there's a lot of principles, philosophies, a lot of reasons we want to do that with where the world is right now. And there's a lot of things that drive us to do that with our kids. But we want to have, this is getting a little in the weeds, we want to have more of a connection to our food, how we grow it, how it's sourced, both meat, both vegetables, the whole thing. And also, we want to be connected to nature more. I've lived in Dallas for so long. Really, we want to be out in creation and just be part of, our kids love that. We love that. So that's just the life we want to have. And that, to me, has been the whole goal. The purpose of, since Sinus Sinet came out with Start With Why, right? Like a book. From the moment I started thinking about starting with my why, the why was to buy land and start a farm. And so it's sort of full circle for why, Franklin Media exists for me to start a farm. It's the whole reason I've been doing it for years. So now stepping back looks like probably moving in next summer, beginning of the summer, probably to Tennessee or Kentucky, somewhere like that, and buying land, starting a farm. And I can probably do what I need to do for the company in about 10 to 15 hours a week remotely right now, and 10 probably if I really get after it. And so I think for me it made sense, and everyone will be at a different stage when they come to this, but you have to weigh, you can sell your company and you get a payout, and that may make sense, but I also like the idea of if it's creating cash flow, if it's creating income, that gives me time to put effort into doing another venture while I'm also maintaining that cash flow for me. And so, and then looking forward probably to selling the business in 2 years, about 2 or 3 years.
So I love the whole story all the way through. And if you had just said, I'm just going to keep cherry picking, maybe build a small team,
sure,
but really I'm making $200,000 a year, that's amazing. That's probably in the top 2% of incomers in the US, that's amazing. And if you had just stuck with that and said, this is good enough, now when it's time to, you
sure,
could have extracted a ton of money and tried to raise money and buy the acreage, but you would not have a business. You would still have the job.
Yeah.
And when it's time for you to transition away and say, can I spend less time in the business so that I can get connected to nature, do the farming, you would not have that luxury. So the question is, just as a nice little bow on all of this, why bother scaling up? Begin with the end in mind. You had a very strong reason in terms of why you were doing what you were doing. That allowed you to make those decisions. And instead of going, well, should I do this or not? I don't really have a reason why. That allowed you to build it up, and now you have the luxury to step back if you want, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So everybody put your hands together and say thanks, Michael. We will take a couple questions. I think Michael's really engaging, and we will field several questions. We already got a bunch, so I'll let you pick and choose.
Sure.
So since you said 95% textbooks, and you're dealing with distributors, so are you buying like now the new textbook with like Keystone pricing, or are you still like going used with like the more?
Yes. Yes. So we do. We have bulk textbook sources, which are kind of a unicorn, but they're out there, and we have a few of them. And then we also have a team that is, we could say, the higher ed department essentially, and they're buying textbooks directly from college bookstores, campuses, sustainability departments, athletic departments. We have donation bins. We work with, it's a lot of dead stock and that kind of thing. There's, and in that world specifically, you've got college bookstores, you've got independents, which are the easiest ones to work with, and then you've got Follett and basically Barnes & Noble, which have, Follett's got 1,300 stores. If you start going down that road, calling on college bookstores, basically, if you're calling on a Barnes & Noble or Follett store, you're not going to get anywhere, generally speaking, unless you go corporate, which is, where we're kind of going with it. But your independent college bookstores, there's a lot of them out there, and they have, most of the time they're off-campus stores. Most on-campus stores are affiliated in some way, a lot of them with some of the bigger institutions that aggregate a lot of their dead stock. So basically what you're after if you go do that is you're trying to buy all of their surplus. And so some of it's new, but we're never paying, we're not paying list prices or anything like that. We're even Keystone prices. Like we have a guide, we have a purchasing guide that goes out to a lot of people. Some of these people are doing buybacks where we're like a second scan for them, where they're scanning if they want it, they keep it. If they don't, they scan for us. The business is definitely moving, especially in textbooks. It's a lot of trading purchasing guides back and forth. That's generally what, Bill, that a lot of people know that. That's a lot of what's happening. Is it's funny, it's very, in general, and as you scale, you'll see this, if you get into textbooks especially, is you're really trading inventory back and forth with a lot of people. It's getting sold online, it's going to someone else, it's getting rented, it's going to someone else, it's coming through us, it's going back online. Like it's a lot of circular motion, and so we're buying from all over the place though. And we work also with some bookstore chains and stuff like that supply us.
I love Haley's first question, what's the most important thing you can focus on?
Sure.
Still obviously several steps behind. So what you're focused on now obviously doesn't make sense for me.
Sure.
But thinking back to like your first, second year, the $500,000 million year, what were you focused on then, and what now, with hindsight, do you think you should have been focused on then?
I'm trying to think of, I don't want this to sound, honestly, I think the focus was pretty good there. Like as far as it really worked, there wasn't a lot in those 2 years specifically, were two of the best years I've had as far as just pure output, input, netting, as far as effort, the whole thing. It really worked well. But back to kind of what I said earlier, I think the focus for me that worked well, or the reason it succeeded and the reason the numbers were higher, is I was buying a lot more expensive material, that's part of it, but I also was willing to do that. So for me, the thing that I focused on that caused that success was, again, everyone else was fighting for the $1, $2 books, so I scanned at half price for years, and I bought a ton of books there, and most people were in the clearance section. Not once did I ever buy clearance books. It was just because that's what everyone else was fighting for, and they were very small. They might be big margin, but it was a lot harder to turn your money. So for me, I look at it and go, if you give me $10,000 at the beginning of the year and I want to turn that, how many times can I turn that? If I'm buying $1 books, it's a lot of effort to turn that money. But if I'm buying $10 books, it's obviously, the thing you have to be okay with is smaller margins. I'm okay making 50% on a book. That's awesome. I'll spend $100 and make 50 all day long. What specifically the book industry, back to the days of us going with Greg and all this kind of thing, early on, I think everyone gets really excited about crazy margins, but they lose sight of that investments in general don't work that way. People look at the stock market and the things you're really happy with are not $400. You don't get 400% returns on most things. You can, but again, I guess what I'm really saying is what worked was spending more money, which I know sounds, but doing it smartly, like doing it in a way that I was okay with smaller margins, but still making a solid investment with the money I used. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it's hard to find those sources, and that's part of it. Is I know that's sort of it's easy to say, but it's hard to actually tell you, here, go buy these books. But again, half price. Most people I knew that were scanning wanted thrift stores. They wanted McKay's. No one wanted to mix with half price because all their books were $7, $10, $15, and nobody thought you could make money.
I would say exactly what he's saying is do what other people aren't doing. So if you want to go to a thrift store and a library sale, you're competing with anybody out there that has a smartphone, which is everybody. So how are you going to win? You can hustle harder. I love Gary Vee, but his whole mentality of just hustle hard. I'd rather work smarter, right? That's kind of the tagline.
Get your unfair advantage.
So find an unfair advantage. For him, it would say, most people say, I'd never spend more than $2 on inventory. That's just stupid. Why would you do that? Well, great. Let people think that. You go do something a little bit more counterintuitive. Avery talks about it a lot. There he is. Get backroom access to thrift stores. Go talk to a manager. Because if you're just going to wait for the books to come downstream where everybody else can scan them on the shelf, you are one of 30 people in there. Versus ask a hard question, talk to a manager, put yourself out there and say, hey, where are these books coming from? Go upstream. So I talk about that a lot. So do something other people won't do. Go upstream, get yourself some sort of a competitive advantage. I've got a source, David's locking down most of Denver, but I've got a library chain that I worked hard at about 3 years to get their contract. At this point, I have the contract. We've had it for 2 years now. They're not going to leave me. David picks up some of it as well. I've tried to offer to sell it to him. We'll get there eventually. But I've got that relationship. I've got that contract. You could come in there and try and offer them more money, and they won't work with you, right? I have that relationship. Michael is making it clear I need to buy him more donuts and Starbucks gift cards because they like me at this point. It's my contract to lose, but I need to show them some of that love as well. So get a contract, get a relationship, do something that other people aren't doing, and that's what you can do to set yourself apart now.
Well, one thing you can do, we talked about this earlier, someone was talking, there's been multiple sources like that we have held onto for years because we've also voluntarily, and this is, not everybody does this, but paid them more. Like at some point we just said, hey, we need to be paying you more for this because it's worth more money. And we've never lost a source that we do that with because they trust us. So at that point, after that, they let us set the price half the time, and it's great. Is there any more?
What percentage of your inventory is new versus used? And for the used, how are you dealing with the counterparts?
So I know that's a big piece, especially
Can of worms.
That's a can of worms. That's right. Number one. So first of all, we are an EPEG best practices seller. So we settled with O&Z. We're under EPEG's best practices, so we can sell everything and anything pretty much. We don't have restrictions, but we follow all the rules. Everything gets basically everything that needs to gets checked for authenticity. It's submitted if it needs to get submitted, and so we're not really we're not worried. We're just not worried about that anymore. It's just part of our process, and we don't really have any restrictions that cause us problems. So that was really helpful. New is where you can get into more problems with that, honestly. So you have to be real careful. Like, I'm a big proponent of selling new inventory. I always have. That's how I started. Those first 2 years, I'd have never done what I did if I wasn't selling new inventory. But you have to be careful because they will definitely crack down and look more for new inventory. So new, probably I would say it's about 15% or so is new. It's not a huge percentage, but that makes a huge difference. If we get a load in that 15% of it happens to be new, then that may be the difference between mildly profitable and wildly profitable.
Can you talk about your mindset just around hiring people and allowing people to take on the responsibility that you'd always done? I know you talked about it a little bit. Maybe you could give more of your mindset around how you were able to get that up. I know a lot of us struggle with that.
Well, it depends on the job too. Obviously, you want no one else in the company actually yet other than our accountants handle anything financial. That's an easy one. Like, I don't need anyone else having access to finances, bank accounts, any of that. It gets hairy. Another thing, as a side note, if you have employees that have access, we actually almost had our Amazon account deleted years ago, and I'm going to be on the phone with them going, we have a multi-million-dollar year account, and it just says that it's pending closure because our accountant's wife got an email saying that some problem was with their Amazon account, and she just requested it be closed. At that point, any user can request that your Amazon account be closed, and so you got to be careful. And I just happened to pull it up and see that it said it was being closed. I would say that's a process that just gets easier. At least for me, it doesn't start easy. starts where I think I'm going to do everything better than everyone, and then I realize, wait a minute, I'm throwing books. I just like throwing books and scanning books, so they can do it just as well as I can. Let them do it. I'll source books. So that's an easy one. But then you start getting into running pricing decisions, algorithms, decision trees, creating our purchasing guides, how much we're going to pay for books, those kind of things. That was really hard to let go of. I mean, but I also realized, number one, pretty quickly, a few years in, I realized I actually had less knowledge about, like James, for instance, I mentioned earlier. He grew into a lot of those things. He didn't do them from day one, but he grew into them because I watched as he basically gained more knowledge about the book market than I have. Because my job, frankly, is not that I don't need a ton of knowledge about the specifics of every book in the book market. He does, because he does guide creation, he does all that stuff. I need to be good at getting the books and knowing which books to get. But I think I also just look at it's a lot of just recognizing that what takes you 10 hours a week to do takes you 1 hour a week to train someone, or 1 hour to train. If you can train someone with 1 hour to do what takes you even 1 hour a week, it saves you a ton of time. Or even if it takes, there's a lot of ways you can describe that, but the time spent training is usually well worth what it takes off your plate. It's just deciding where the limits are of what your skill set is, what you're best at, and what you essentially need to be paid for. And then everything else, I mean, you delegate if you can, if you have the freedom to do that.
We'll take 3 more questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some people in the room here that are in the same boat. You know, we can make $800,000 a year. We're cherry picking, operating out of our garage. Decide what the next step is. We're on scale. How do I double or triple that business? Or add a first employee? Or do I need to go to both? Or what's the decision look like for that guy?
You're asking what's the catalyst for making that decision, or
How do you go about, how you choose that direction? Because I think a lot of us in the room, at least I am, I know I've talked to several people that are in that position, or they're on their way to that position. I'm a solopreneur, I
Sure.
built myself a great job that makes $80,000, $100,000 a year. Well, how do I scale that next week? How do I hire an employee?
Right.
Drive on my garage? What is that?
Do you want to make that decision?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Do you have a reason to go further?
Sure.
then you will. It's like when I started being the 2,000 square foot shop. Like I didn't make the decision. It was made. Like I didn't have space. I had more books coming in. I had to get a building. I had to hire people. On some level, that's the best way to grow, is when you go, I just can't do this. I need to find someone, because it's a lot harder to find someone when you don't need someone. But when you need someone, you'll hire someone real quick. You'll find a building because you'll do whatever you have to do because the pressure's on. And so we can talk more about it too offline. But it sounds like if you're there, then you're there. Like you just have to. As far as the specifics of how to hire someone, that kind of thing, that's more.
And it goes along with, because I feel like I need to scale everything at the same time. I need to scale sourcing at the same time, processing at the same time, hire someone, maybe more space.
Yeah. No, I know. Did you have?
Yeah, I was just a little bit curious about your incentive structure that you said you offer opportunities.
Sure. So everyone on the floor, other than our floor manager, Aubrey, she is the sort of first salaried person, and from her up, everyone has some form of bonus structure that's salaried. Everyone that is hourly on the warehouse floor is generally just hourly, and there's periodic, just random bonuses that may come through. But generally speaking, everyone is on salary, has some bonus structure. Floor manager, it's based on processed material. It's basically on listed books, essentially, without getting too in the weeds on it. There's more to it, and there's a amount set to that, because we realized quickly that the only thing is certain sources are a lot different. Certain sources get listed way faster. Certain sources don't. So you have to think through some of those things. So they're paid on books listed. We have others that are paid on that it's more part of our revenue or profit that's based on just in general as a company whole. They get some portion or share of that. And then the higher ed team is based specifically on they have a base salary, and then they are paid based on the profitability either of our director of the higher ed division. He's paid on the department as a whole, and then the reps are based on just their profitability. So the way we do that is we basically say gross profit is sales. I mean, is your sales after, again, if it's marketplace, after marketplace fees, any other sales, wholesale, that kind of stuff, just all your revenue together, minus your expenses. I mean, it's pretty basic. Minus your expenses. Their gross profit is what we go off of. And then they have tiered commissions, essentially. But I mean, I say bonuses, but however you want to look at it. And they also have every turn, they're also paid a non-compete fee, which is not, that's something I'm big on. Not everybody is. And in Texas, it's really hard to enforce a non-compete. And the goal is not to enforce a non-compete, but if you start having people source and they're building a Rolodex, right? They're building a business. That's why I say, I tell all our people, I hope you make $1 million. Number one, that means I make money too. That's great. But it's really about, I need them to know there is no ceiling. Like, I need you to be able to flourish in what you're doing and make really good money. So, again, you're just incentivizing. It's difficult to figure that out, honestly, to start. But for your business, you just have to figure out what's their time worth, and then how do you incentivize them to spend it trying to build your empire, because that's what essentially that's what they're doing, and you got to figure out what makes it worth it for them.
That's a great question. We'll do one more. Last question.
So you mentioned having a contract with a source or whatever. What's the verbiage in that kind of contract? Is this big long contract? I will take X at this price.
We have very few contracts.
Well, I mean, like Taylor mentioned, hey, you have a contract.
No, I know.
Is it these complicated to you? Like complicated contracts, one-page memorandum of agreement? Hey, I will value whatever you sell at X price.
Depends. I'm probably not the best person. First of all, I have an aversion to contracts personally, because they represent something that I don't need. Like, I don't need a contract. It's not that I don't want it, but it's kind of like a non-compete with an employee. Sure, it exists. I'm glad it's there. Maybe it means something to them, but I'm not going to go after an employee, because that's not the point. It's just sort of and a contract is the same way. If they're not happy, if I'm not happy, we probably shouldn't be doing business together. So we don't really do contracts. Now, that's not the case. When you get into bulk, goodwills, there's more. It's more necessary probably in that world. But in my world, it's just relational. I mean, it's make sure you take care of them, and I don't think those contracts, you can speak to some other people about that, are not super complicated necessarily. It's just
cool. Well, thanks, Michael, for coming out. Really appreciate your insight.